On a rainy night, a figure named Alvin was walking through the forest, muttering to himself about how the sky had been clear earlier. Did the weather hate him too? Just a few hours ago at the bar, his guild leader had asked him to leave the party. When Alvin asked for the reason, the leader acted as if Alvin already knew. Back in the present, Alvin wondered how many times he would have to face the same situation. When the rain finally stopped, he stepped out of the forest and found himself standing before a dungeon. The eerie silence didn't surprise him. It was natural for people to avoid the place after hearing all the rumors. He checked his inventory, potions, food, antidotes, and spare equipment. Once he confirmed everything was in order, he made up his mind. He would enter the dungeon alone. Exploring it and defeating the boss by himself was the only option he had left. He entered the gate ahead and found strange letters carved into the wall. The writing looked ominous, but he chose not to waste time thinking about it. Moving forward, he reached the setting sun cave, the first floor of the dungeon. He still wondered why his parameters and magic were useless outside, even though everything functioned normally within the dungeon. Inside, he activated his boosts, reminding himself that outside he was just a 19-year-old kid. But in here he became someone entirely different, someone with overwhelming power. He continued defeating skeleton monsters and eventually reached the 11th floor. His many skills gave him a clear advantage, allowing him to manifest abilities far beyond his level. As he explored deeper, he arrived at the 17th floor, where he encountered a paralyzing slime. He already knew this monster dropped a large number of coins and that its weakness was its core, though destroying it in a single strike was difficult. He was still planning his attack when the slime suddenly leapt into the air, giving him the perfect opening to slash it down. But to his surprise, it didn't drop a single coin. That was when he realized the truth. This was the effect of his greatest weakness. The moment reminded him of something his leader had said. The party had already found a replacement swordsman, someone high level, with far more skills than him. The leader had told Alvin that his skills were impossible to count, and suggested he check the one he took the most pride in. When Alvin finally looked, he found the skill drop rate reduction, a passive ability that decreased item drops by 80% for any monster he killed. In that moment he understood everything. The more he fought, the more he reduced the party's earnings. No wonder people disliked him. He remembered becoming an adventurer at 14, grinding levels alone for years to try to overcome the burden of his negative skill. Thanks to his unusual abilities, he had leveled up quickly, and eventually joined parties. He had learned how to fight efficiently, how to pass kill credit to others, and how to adapt to any situation. He had worked harder than anyone he knew, taking pride in his effort. Yet despite everything, he still couldn't escape the weight of his flawed skill. The thought exhausted him. Hard work alone couldn't fix everything. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the dungeon. Alvin sprinted toward the sound and found a girl surrounded by yellow goblins. He knew how dangerous they were in groups, yet the girl, judging by her equipment, a priestess, was fighting them alone. He rushed in, cutting down the goblins, and asked if she still had enough MP to move. She nodded, and he told her to fall back and correct her stance. She apologized for troubling him, and he noticed an arrow wound on her shoulder. Telling her not to worry, he asked if she was also an adventurer, assuming she was trapped in the same situation as he was. She managed to stand, and he reminded her to focus on protecting herself. He decided to finish the goblins quickly. Using his skills, he fought them off, though they kept coming as if trying to overwhelm him through sheer numbers. But they underestimated someone who had been fighting solo since the beginning. Eventually, he used Zantetsu to slice them all down. The last goblin charged at the girl, and when he warned her, she managed to defeat it with her staff. She finally relaxed once the battle ended. They headed to a nearby safe point in the dungeon. The girl introduced herself as Cockle, and thanked him for saving her. Alvin introduced himself as a swordsman. As they sat down, he asked why she was alone, wondering if her party had been wiped out. She shook her head and said she had simply started adventuring alone. Alvin was surprised. This was the first time he had ever seen a priestess working solo. Cockle explained that no one was willing to team up with her. Alvin said that was a serious problem, especially since she had been fighting recklessly. Sitting beside him, she quietly added that she would show him the reason no party wanted her. Alvin told her she shouldn't reveal her details to someone she had just met, but she didn't seem bothered. When he checked her status, he froze. She was level 80. Embarrassment washed over him. He had thought he was helping someone weaker, but clearly that wasn't the case. Cockle quickly explained that it was simply her first time being caught off guard and cornered while fighting alone. She then showed him her skill sheet. She possessed 11 skills, but one stood out. a skill Alvin had never even heard of. Usurper of the Severed Head. Kokol explained that this was a minus skill, and because of it her level had risen abnormally fast. Alvin wondered if such a high level was truly the result of that ability. She explained the effect clearly. Whenever someone else in her party killed a monster, the system treated her as the one who delivered the final blow. Alvin asked whether the actual killer still received experience and item drops. She confirmed they did, but the real problem was the kill bonus. The bonus experience awarded to the one who dealt the killing blow was about 3 times the normal amount, and her skill absorbed all of it. As long as she was present, every party member would level at a painfully slow rate. Alvin then asked why she had been expelled from so many parties, and suggested she could join a gathering-focused group, since a high-level healer should have had no issues finding work. But with a sad expression, Kokol revealed the additional penalty. Her skill magnified both the experience and drop rate of whoever struck the finishing blow. Theoretically useful, but in practice impossible to manage. No workaround existed, and the skill turned otherwise valuable abilities into burdens. She apologized for suddenly sharing something so unpleasant. Then she asked if he had heard the rumor that the boss of the Setting Sun Cave dropped a skill erasing item. She had come here specifically to find it, but had failed, and she knew she could never defeat the boss alone. Alvin felt a chill. While listening to her, he realized he might have overlooked something important about his own drop rate reduction skill, and what its true long-term effect might be. Kokol continued, saying she planned to refine her abilities as an adventurer, so he didn't need to form a party with her. Instead, she asked for his help defeating the boss, and offered him all the rewards in return, insisting this was an important request meant only for them. Alvin tried to compose himself, but before he could stop the words from leaving his mouth, he asked her to form a party with him. Stunned, Kokol stared at him and asked whether he had even listened to anything she had told him. As they walked across the 17th floor, Alvin told Kokol not to worry. Her minus skill wouldn't affect him. He suggested they fight 2 or 3 battles together to test his theory. She agreed, then asked if he wanted a buff. Alvin was caught off guard. After being a solo outcast for so long, the feeling of having a companion again was almost overwhelming. When she called out to him again, he replied that they were still in the upper half of the medium layers, so a buff wasn't necessary. But Kokol simply pointed forward and told him to look. Another paralyzing slime appeared. Alvin immediately rushed toward it, determined to confirm his hypothesis. With a single strike, the slime burst and a massive pile of coins spilled out. Kokol was stunned that he had killed it instantly and called him amazing. Alvin was equally shocked. Soon after, a group of yellow goblins appeared, and he cut them down, receiving antidotes and coins one after another. Kokol commented that such drops were extremely rare. As they continued deeper, they encountered electric spiders. After defeating them, Alvin obtained an electric orb, and Kokol said he was incredibly lucky to get such a valuable item. She noticed he looked confused, and when he addressed her, she apologized if she had been annoying. But Alvin suddenly said it again. He wanted her to form a party with him, and added that she should stay with him forever, just like this. Kokol froze, confused by the intensity of his words, and reminded him that they barely knew each other. Alvin admitted she was right, and revealed that he too possessed a minus skill, one even more unusual than hers. When Kokol learned he had drop rate reduction, she finally understood how difficult his journey must have been. Alvin admitted he had just been kicked out of another party for that very reason. Kokol realized then that Alvin had also come to the dungeon, seeking to erase his minus skill. Alvin said he hoped the dungeon boss would drop the skill-clearing item, then explained that the reason he was receiving normal drops was because of her ability. She was shocked that her minus skill was helping him, though she reminded him he still wouldn't receive any kill bonus. Alvin acknowledged this but pointed out that her skill behaved similarly to a drop rate boosting effect, and that abilities like that had never activated for his former party members. She understood his implication. Alvin continued, explaining that since they started fighting together, his drop rate reduction skill hadn't activated even once. As long as they stayed in the same party, he believed he could finally function like a normal swordsman. Kokol hesitated, saying she was confused because it seemed like he had noticed her skill worked unusually well for him. Alvin agreed, and added that even after they cleared the dungeon, he wanted her to remain in a party with him. She looked uncertain, and he wondered whether something was wrong. She quickly denied it, and smiled, saying it actually made her happy to know that even a skill like hers had a real purpose. Alvin understood the reason behind her hesitation. He had caused trouble for his own parties because of his minus skill as well. so he gently told her she didn't need to force herself to give an answer right away. Instead, he asked if she would at least stay in the party with him until they cleared the dungeon. Cockle agreed, and the two of them shook hands, officially forming a temporary party for the rest of the dungeon. While clearing monsters, they reached the 24th floor. After the items dropped, Alvin noticed his storage was completely full, thanks to Cockle's support. As he glanced at her while picking up the loot, he felt she looked a little tired, and suggested taking a break. She said she was perfectly fine. Suddenly, Alvin rushed toward her, insisting that if she had any problems, she should tell him so they could find a solution together. Flustered, she eventually brought up the unique sword he had used to defeat monsters in a single strike. Later, she had learned the sword was actually just an ordinary blade, but she pointed out that hitting monsters, especially ones like paralyzing slimes, was usually difficult. She explained that striking their weak points allowed him to defeat even mid-level monsters with one hit, and that he had also been receiving her strength boosts the entire time. She admitted it felt strange because Alvin kept doing the same thing to every monster. Alvin took it as a compliment and said he had studied ways to avoid causing trouble with his skills or dragging others down. He added that he simply wanted to show off a little in front of her, because she was a precious comrade and he didn't want her to give up on him. Just knowing that would put him at ease. She was left speechless, too embarrassed to look at him directly. Suddenly something shiny caught her eye, and they went to investigate a treasure box. Alvin warned her to stay back, saying it would be dangerous if it was trapped. He admitted he always hesitated when dealing with traps alone, and having a healer nearby felt reassuring. When he opened the box, he found a scroll. As he unrolled it, he wondered if it contained information reinforcing the rumors about the boss drop. Since his minus skill was now invalid, he wasn't worried. Their main goal was the skill erasing item. Cockle then quietly mentioned that only one person might be able to use the boss drop item, and suggested that Alvin should use it on himself. Surprised, Alvin asked why she would suddenly say that. She explained that the boss drop was extremely rare with an unprecedented effect, so the possibility of it being limited to one user seemed realistic. If that happened, she said, she would end up owing him for helping her, and that was why she had looked so troubled earlier. Alvin replied that if it truly ended up being usable by only one person, they should just sell it. Cockle was shocked. He continued, saying that what he really wanted was someone calm by his side, someone willing to continue adventuring with him. As long as she stayed with him, he could overcome anything with his skills. His level was already high enough. He had no real reason to remain stuck where he was. Cockle thanked him and said that if she kept taking away his experience points and he received no reward for his efforts, dissatisfaction would eventually grow. That was how such groups usually fell apart. Alvin understood. He said he had heard similar stories in the past but never felt anything personally, until now. He finally realized that jealousy, suspicion, and humiliation grew alongside power, and those emotions could swallow both the possessor and their companions. He admitted that until now he probably had the same troubled expression she wore. He knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and reassured her that as an adventurer, he would never betray her. She remained silent for a while, leaving Alvin unsure of what to say next. Since he had already spoken so much about his own situation, he added that the item might not even be limited to a single user, and they could worry about it only after they obtained it. She agreed and bowed apologetically, saying she might have said something strange. Alvin reassured her that he didn't mind at all, and suggested they continue forward. As they walked, Cockle couldn't help but feel that Alvin was truly a kind person, someone who had suddenly appeared on the same dungeon floor, at the same level, as if guided by fate. She had confessed the truth about her mindless skill to him so easily, and she believed it was right to be honest with him. She thought that Alvin's desire to form a party with someone like her came from the fact that they shared similar circumstances. She didn't care what the future held, as long as she could stay by his side. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the corridor. Alvin said it sounded like a battle, and not an ordinary one. The ceiling was even shaking, with rocks falling down. He told Cockle to stay alert and follow him. The two of them ran toward the sound. When they arrived, they were shocked to see a group of golems surrounding something or someone. They guessed that an adventurer might be trapped inside, and dealing with so many golems would be extremely difficult. Alvin stepped forward to take on as many as he could. He swung with all his strength but was pushed back, realizing how tough the enemies were. He asked Cockle to buff him while he redirected the monster's attention toward himself. He knew that emerald golems were heavily resistant to physical attacks, making them a terrible matchup for sword users. His skill Zantetsu wouldn't cut through them easily. so he decided to use it mainly to distract them, focusing instead on speed. Meanwhile, Cockle was chanting, telling herself that she wasn't simply accommodating a comrade. She genuinely wanted to support Alvin with all her strength. Alvin rushed in to attack the golem and immediately sensed something different. He unleashed a physical resistance penetration strike, realizing it was the first time he had ever received such an advanced buff. With that boost, he launched another full-power blow. After striking the golem and stepping back, he understood that the buff had allowed him to completely ignore its natural resistance, saving them a lot of time. Relieved and excited, he told Cockle he was counting on her. She thanked him and added that his ability to strike precisely at a golem's weak points was truly astonishing. Alvin heard a faint voice coming from somewhere between the golems, so he called out, reassuring the person trapped inside that they would take care of the monsters, and asking them to stay calm. When no response followed, he focused entirely on cutting through the golems, repeating again and again for the person to hold on. He continued striking, while Cockle strengthened him with continuous buffs. After a hard fight, they finally managed to defeat every golem. Alvin commented on how incredible the buff had been, and asked if Cockle was okay after using so much MP, admitting he was genuinely surprised. He added that the reason the buff lasted through the whole battle was likely because both of them were around level 18. Hearing his praise made Cockle feel blessed. Alvin noticed she was in a good mood, and he felt relieved that he didn't need to worry anymore. He turned to the person they had rescued, and felt grateful they had arrived in time. They found a girl dressed like a magician, holding a wand. Alvin asked if she had been all alone, and she apologized repeatedly. The three of them headed to the safe point on the 24th floor, where the girl explained that other adventurers were stuck because the map display didn't show their location properly. The ceiling and walls in that area protruded in complicated ways, causing the golems to get lodged there. Since the golems lacked long-distance attacks, she had been able to farm them freely with her magic. Alvin wondered if she had gathered all the golems herself, and blamed his group for interfering, but she assured him it was fine. Farming them had only been a side job for her. Alvin then asked if she had come to the cave to defeat the boss. She shook her head, saying that as a sorceress, taking on a boss alone wasn't her role, and forming a party was impossible for her. Alvin agreed with her reasoning. Then the girl added that she had come to obtain the boss drop item in this dungeon so she could erase her minus skill. At that, Alvin and Cockle immediately exchanged a look. Alvin and Cockle explained everything to the sorceress, Melina, who quickly understood that their party was only temporary. Alvin confirmed it, adding that he had met Cockle on the 17th layer and recruited her there. Melina assumed they were curious about her minus skill, and revealed that it was the divine protection of the god of envy. Because of this skill, she had never been able to join a proper party, and despite being a sorceress, she always traveled alone. When Alvin asked about the skill's effects, Melina explained that it caused no issues as long as she worked by herself, so she would describe the effects as if she were part of a group. The first effect increased everyone's stats by 10%. The second effect activated each time a monster was killed. The one who landed the final blow would lose 3% of their stats, treated as a debuff that stacked with every kill. Alvin asked whether killing 40 monsters would result in a 120% reduction, essentially erasing a person's entire stat pool. Melina denied that and used one of their current stats as an example. She explained that after 3 kills, any gained increase would practically vanish, and from the 4th kill onward, the reduction would begin eating into the base value. Multiplying it for 40 kills would result in roughly a 70% total decrease. However, since it was a debuff, it gradually faded over time and didn't stack infinitely. She admitted she had calculated it many times and found that the reduction rarely became so severe that it completely crippled someone. Alvin remarked that the minus skill didn't sound as terrible as he expected, but Melina disagreed. She said the third effect was what truly made the skill disastrous. Setting aside the 10% increase, she explained that the third effect caused the kill bonus to be divided equally among all party members. Since the description didn't appear outright, it was difficult for newcomers to notice. The effect triggered when a party gained bonus stats from kills at the same time the killer's own stats were being reduced. Under those conditions, how were combatants supposed to fight? Alvin wondered if that meant they would have to avoid dealing the finishing blow and let someone else handle it. Melina confirmed it, adding that combatants would no longer be able to strike freely. This restriction easily led to accidents and dangerous mistakes. No matter how impressive a maneuver looked, they would still take damage, and their HP would drop, weakening their performance in the next turn. She admitted she didn't fully understand the mechanism behind it, but that was simply how the skill worked. If someone's HP reached 0, they died, and no healing spell or item used on the corpse could revive them. She described how terrifying it had been to see people arguing over who should land the final hit while injured monsters were still standing. As someone in the rear guard who needed time to chant, she couldn't always support them in time. She had repeatedly witnessed reckless, borderline suicidal attacks caused by that pressure, which eventually led to each of her parties collapsing. Things grew so dangerous that either they expelled her, or she left on her own. At last, Alvin understood why she preferred to work alone. Melina added that she did not want to risk dying because of her own skill. In theory, the effects seemed manageable, but in practice, exploring solo had become extremely difficult. That was how the rumors began, stories of adventurers sealing themselves inside caves. She explained that she had already mapped a route to the boss and had come specifically to obtain the erasic skill. Alvin realized that Melina's minus skill was tied to her very life, yet something about the situation still bothered him. He thought that even if he landed the killing blow, he didn't need the bonus himself, so he didn't mind if it was redistributed. As the thought came to him, he glanced at Kokol. Melina continued, saying that trapping and hunting golems had earned her a large amount of money. She planned to hire support only when she was fully prepared to challenge the boss. She knew there could be trouble if she didn't use that money to purchase a contract, so she intended to walk the path alone. Suddenly, Kokol stepped forward, took Melina's hand and asked to form a party with her. Melina was stunned, wondering if Kokol had even been listening. She pointed out that hesitating to take kills because a swordsman was nearby would put all of them in danger, but Kokol didn't budge, still holding Melina's hand. Irritated, Melina demanded to know what was wrong with her. As they prepared to leave, Melina asked again what Kokol was trying to accomplish. Kokol answered simply, they would defeat the monster together, as a party. At that moment, Alvin noticed his stats rise by 10%. Melina asked whether they intended to level up, stating that even non-combatants could earn a steady stream of bonuses if they wanted to be more efficient. Kokol cut her off, declaring that she had no intention of leveling up and would not be taking any kill bonuses. When they encountered a tentacle plant, Melina told them to leave it to her. She would take it down immediately. She began chanting at incredible speed, shocking Alvin, and in an instant she obliterated the monster. Alvin praised her. Melina explained that she was level 38, so as long as she used an attribute the enemy was weak to, defeating it was easy. They asked which attribute she had used. Melina replied that she possessed all 5 primary attributes and had learned every spell available to someone at her level. She added that she chose her spells based on the situation. Suddenly they heard a noise nearby. Kokol remarked that Melina's level alone was already extraordinary, yet she had also mastered all 5 attributes. Alvin asked what the problem was. Kokol explained that spellcasters had an enormous number of spells depending on their attribute, and each attribute required entirely different incantations. As a mage's level increased, both the number and complexity of spells multiplied. When combined with a caster's personal skills and the abilities of their staff, the variety became overwhelming. Alvin recalled that even his former leader had only mastered 3 attributes. Kokol then pointed out that Melina had an A+ rating in all 5 attributes, meaning she possessed an exceptional memory, and had managed to memorize every one of those incantations. Melina added that she also had 5 different attribute-enhancing skills and didn't want to waste any of them, so she had learned all 5 attributes to make full use of her abilities. Kokol said she was filled to the brim with strict priestess magic herself, so all she could do was show respect for Melina's overwhelming talent. Melina explained that when fighting alone, it was best to attack with as many advantageous attributes as possible. Alvin felt that being a sorceress was a difficult job for someone who worked solo, yet Melina had endured and trained relentlessly up to that point. Kokol checked their party status and mentioned that the debuff given by Melina's divine protection of the god of envy was marked by a melting heart icon. She explained that it was known as the god of envy's curse, and she had been stuck with it ever since she killed the golem. Alvin checked as well, and Kokol noted that all their stats had dropped by 3%. Melina said that this was normal, and that for the moment there didn't seem to be any additional effects. Kokol suggested they continue battling for now. They moved onward and came across another golem. Alvin saw that this emerald golem wasn't trapped this time, and the rear guard wouldn't be enough to defeat it alone, so he joined the fight. When the golem was struck, Alvin was surprised by the overwhelming knockback. The magic support was far stronger than expected. He followed up with a heavy attack, shattering the golem into small pieces. He guessed he could have finished it even without a physical resistance penetration buff, since its remaining HP was low. Melina complimented his movements and said it was obvious he must be at a high level as well. Alvin replied that he wasn't as high as Kokol. When Kokol checked the debuff again, she said it wasn't there. Melina asked what she meant, but suddenly Kokol reached for Melina's hands and asked her once again to form a party with them. Then she abruptly tightened her grip and asked Melina to stay with her forever. Melina was completely confused by the sudden shift. Flustered, she said the request put her in a difficult position, especially since they were both women and Kokol had said something so intense out of nowhere. Kokol panicked and explained she hadn't meant it that way. She was simply repeating the exact words Alvin had once said to her. Lowering her voice, she clarified that she only wanted Melina to stay in their party even after they left this dungeon. Melina, still embarrassed, tried to calm down. Once she regained her composure, she reminded Kokol that she had already explained why she couldn't be part of any party. She then asked Alvin if he wouldn't mind hearing the full truth. Both Alvin and Kokol admitted that they too possessed mindless skills, and then they explained everything to her. Melina found it hard to believe that Usurper of the Severed Head could produce such effects, but considering Kokol's level of 80, it was the only explanation that made sense. She then asked about Alvin's level, which was 43. Alvin explained that he had no choice but to earn drops in a normal manner, so his level naturally rose. Melina finally understood that all three of them shared the same goal. However, she added that if they were acting out of sympathy, she could only accept their feelings, not their interference, because she had her own way of doing things. Kokol insisted it wasn't sympathy at all, and told Melina to check her own status first, and then the party status. When Melina checked, she was shocked to find that she didn't have the God of Envy curse. Instead, she had received the kill bonus from the tentacle plant. She then noticed that Kokol had 2 layers of the God of Envy curse. At that moment she remembered. When a party member killed a monster, it was treated as if everyone had killed it. Kokol agreed and explained that because of the effect of Usurper of the Severed Head, every kill was now counted as hers, which meant she could return all the experience points she had previously stolen from others. Melina added that Kokol wouldn't be able to earn any bonus points from now on, but Kokol said she was completely fine with that. Melina then turned to Alvin and pointed out that since the kill bonus would now be shared evenly among the party, there was no real benefit for him in choosing that skill. Alvin replied that he actually preferred it this way. No one deserved full credit for a kill alone, and in truth even the golem he had defeated so easily had only been possible because of Melina's support. Melina hesitated, then said that the God of Envy curse should still be distributed among the combatants, which meant Kokol would be the only one receiving it. In response, Kokol immediately began chanting the clear spell, her endowment effect, and explained that if her debuffs ever became too heavy, she could simply remove them using that skill. While exploring deeper, they eventually reached the 32nd floor, where they encountered a golem and several lizard-like creatures. One of the lizards rushed past Alvin and nearly struck Kokol and Melina. Alvin narrowly missed it and asked them to take care of it. Melina agreed and eliminated the creature, while Alvin handled the golem and the remaining monsters. After the battle ended, they discovered an unusual drop. Melina explained that it was a merman's tear, a rare and valuable gemstone. Kokol remarked that Alvin had incredible luck. Alvin decided to give the item to Melina. She was stunned, knowing how expensive such a gemstone was, but Alvin said it was repayment for stealing her kills earlier when she had trapped all the golems. Remembering that moment, Melina walked up to him and told him not to worry about it. She wanted him to keep the item and consider it accepted. Her tone suggested that his earlier hesitation might have been dangerous, and hesitating again in a moment where he needed to save someone, even for a split second, would be unacceptable. Because of that, she felt he had made the right choice. Alvin understood that Melina was being completely logical, so he agreed. When she added that he was probably thinking she was logical to a fault, he denied it. She admitted she might be, just a little, before turning embarrassed. Kokol realized Melina was simply looking out for them. They continued onward, noting how deep the dungeon seemed. Alvin explained that in smaller dungeons like this one, the boss room was usually located somewhere in the middle or lower floors. Kokol agreed, mentioning she hadn't been able to find any map of the lower levels at the map shop. Melina wondered how much farther they still had to go, and began to feel uneasy. Alvin wondered if she was thinking about taking a rest on one of the upper floors, since none of them knew where the next safe point might be. Melina quickly said she wasn't tired and could continue. She then asked Kokol if she felt the same, saying it was her fault. Their stats had been steadily decreasing. Kokol reassured her that it was completely fine, and that the reduced combat power didn't bother her at all. In fact, she said she was happy she wasn't getting all the experience bonuses. Melina was shocked and asked why anyone would be happy about that. Kokol explained that Alvin was the one carrying most of the weight as their only frontline fighter. Alvin responded that it was natural, since he had their excellent support, healing, buffs, and cover fire. He also added that his negative skill was gone, and he had even gained some experience bonuses himself. Kokol apologized again, worried he might feel they were taking advantage of him. Melina continued, saying that despite being a swordsman, Alvin also had the resilience and experience of a tank. Alvin grew flustered at the compliment, and said he was relieved if he was fulfilling his role properly. Then he spotted something and pointed it out. There were flavor text written above them. Since Melina couldn't see it from her height, she told Alvin that he was tall enough to read it for everyone. Alvin read the inscription aloud, noting that it looked similar to the text at the dungeon entrance, and wondered whether the first letter of each word might form a hidden message. Kokol commented that it didn't seem related to any hint about a boss drop. Melina thought carefully, considering how dungeons appeared irregularly in different locations and vanished once their boss was defeated. That meant they had only one chance to obtain the boss drop. She wanted to confirm something, but chose her words cautiously. Calling Alvin over, she asked whether he intended to defeat the boss. Alvin said he wasn't tired at all and planned to continue. Melina clarified that she was referring to the item from the buster. Kokol reacted with surprise, asking if Melina seriously believed that someone would use an item capable of erasing their skill, especially since it could only be used once, even in the worst-case scenario. Melina agreed and began explaining several details about the item. But after her long lecture, Alvin and Kokol responded at the exact same time, saying they would worry about it only after they obtained the item. Melina was shocked by how perfectly in sync they were, even though they had just met, and accused them of deceiving her. Alvin told her it was normal to be cautious and asked her to listen. He explained that their situation could change at any moment. They might learn new information as they went deeper, or another group might already be ahead of them fighting the boss. Because of that, he preferred focusing on what they could do right now, starting with securing the boss drop. Melina reluctantly agreed, thinking they were indeed skilled adventurers. From the way they spoke, she could tell they weren't the type to put their own interests first or make reckless decisions. She believed they might even find solutions she could accept. However, she was confused by the odd expression on Kokol's face. Then she announced that the plan was perfect, the best option, and likely the fastest way to reach their goal. Alvin and Kokol both promised they would do their best. Melina then asked about the strange thing Kokol had just said. Alvin and Kokol became flustered, questioning whether it had really sounded that strange. Alvin quickly suggested they look for a safe point on that floor. Suddenly a terrible scream echoed through the area, startling both Kokol and Melina. They tried to locate the source, but the echoes made it impossible to pinpoint. Alvin said they should check behind them, and when they turned around, they saw a boy running for his life, chased by a group of lizard-type monsters. Alvin decided they needed to help him immediately. Kokol prepared herself, but Melina told them not to hesitate, and suggested switching positions as they engaged the monsters. She added that she would start with an extra-large attack, something the enemies would never forget. Alvin wondered if she intended to use a ranged spell, but he also knew the adventurer boy was still in front of her. Melina told him not to worry and asked him to signal the boy to dodge left, the moment the spell activated. Alvin agreed and prepared himself to warn the boy. Kokol relaxed and cast an electric element buff, and Melina approved of her choice. Once everything was ready, Alvin shouted to the boy, telling him to dodge to the side when he gave the signal. The boy looked confused at first, so Alvin pointed toward a small hole in the wall as a hint. As all three of them began chanting, Alvin kept his eyes fixed on the boy. The boy grew visibly frightened, realizing they were warning him about a massive ranged attack and that he needed to move quickly. The moment Melina activated her spell, Alvin called out the signal, and the boy immediately leapt aside. In the next instant, all the enemies were wiped out. Melina praised the boy for reacting in time. Alvin complimented her on how effortlessly she had erased the monsters and added that she had a sharp eye. He had never even noticed the hole that made for the perfect evasive point. Melina simply replied that avoiding unmapped terrain was second nature to her. Alvin then called Kokol over and asked about the debuffs she had received. She replied that she was just about to cleanse them. After a moment, they noticed more enemies approaching, so Alvin decided to deal with them himself. All three of them moved in to fight, and seeing this, the boy grew excited and tried to join the fray. Alvin told him not to push himself and to rest a moment, but the boy rushed forward anyway, slashing at monsters and shouting that he felt great and his HP was full. They continued fighting together until all the enemies were defeated. Soon after, they reached the safe point on the 32nd floor. The boy apologized for accidentally attracting such a large group of monsters and then praised Alvin for being strong and saving him. Alvin reassured him, saying adventurers were meant to help one another. The boy introduced himself as Tet, a thief, and quickly clarified that he didn't steal from people outside the dungeon. Alvin understood and explained that a job class didn't define a person's character. Alvin, Kokol, and Melina introduced themselves as well, adding that they had formed a temporary party. Alvin asked whether Tet had been traveling alone. Tet admitted that he was, and despite appearances claimed to be a very high-level adventurer. Melina was shocked and asked how he could say that after the state he had been in moments before. Tet apologized, explaining that the sheer number of monsters had simply overwhelmed him. He said that if people heard about a thief exploring the lower floors, they would assume he was searching for treasure chests, since that area was overflowing with loot. Alvin recalled that the thief class excelled in agility for escaping and dexterity for unlocking chests, meaning they didn't rely entirely on combat, which made them ideal for solo exploration. Alvin also felt that Tet's fighting ability suggested he really was high level. Even so, something didn't sit right with him, so Alvin asked whether Tet also had a negative skill. Tet asked if they had come all the way down believing the rumor about a boss drop that could erase skills. He insisted the rumor was complete nonsense. Melina grew angry and stepped closer, demanding to know what he meant. Tet calmly told her to relax and explained that skills were something people were born with, tied to their very lives and could not be erased. He said no convenient item capable of breaking such a fundamental rule could exist in their world, and questioned whether they truly intended to chase after such an idea. Melina agreed, saying she had examined the dungeon text in meticulous detail during their journey, and truly believed something capable of stripping away skills existed. Tet insisted he knew more about items than the others because of his class, and was certain that nothing in the world could permanently alter someone's stats. But Melina stepped closer and said it was far too early to be sure. There were countless skills they had never seen or even heard of. Tet considered her point and admitted it was difficult to prove that something didn't exist, and that they might indeed be chasing a fool's errand. Alvin reminded him that they had suspected such an item might exist long before entering the dungeon, and despite that uncertainty, they had come this far. Tet asked whether they were prepared to be disappointed. Alvin thanked him for the warning but said they still intended to continue. Tet then revealed that the boss room was located on the 40th floor, which surprised Alvin, far deeper than he had expected. Typically, at least 4 well-leveled adventurers were needed for a boss raid, and they were short on numbers. Tet told them bluntly that no matter how strong they were, challenging the boss with only 3 people would be extremely difficult. Melina finally understood what he meant and stepped closer, asking if he was willing to join their party. Tet grew flustered and backed away, insisting he wouldn't take any risks, not even in a temporary party. Alvin apologized but stated that it wasn't the right time to turn back. Melina agreed, saying they needed to at least confirm whether the dungeon truly extended to 40 floors. Kukulitz and Alvin grew excited as well. Tet listened quietly, then stood up and said he would guide them to the boss room. He explained that he had never gone inside because he had no interest in boss battles, but he had reached the door. Alvin was relieved and said it would be a great help, though he asked why Tet was willing to do it. Tet replied that they would press onward even if he tried to stop them, so he wanted them to treat it as his apology for the trouble he had caused earlier. Melina was delighted. Now all the prerequisites to face the boss had been fulfilled, and she urged them to move on. Suddenly Tet pulled out several poison-resistant potions and handed them around, saying the potions would prevent them from being affected by poison. Cockle wondered if they needed them since she could cast a resistance buff. Tet explained that every monster beyond that point inflicted poison, and a long-acting potion was far more reliable than a buff that would eventually expire. It would also reduce the cleric's burden. Melina agreed to take one. As they sorted the vials, Alvin felt grateful that they wouldn't have to waste time on unnecessary detours, but he also couldn't ignore the weight of Tet's warning. The boss waited on the 40th floor of a 40-layer dungeon, and he reminded himself not to overdo things and put everyone at risk. He figured that if they returned safely to rethink their plan, everything would work out. But suddenly, Alvin felt something strange and collapsed. He instantly realized that Tet had tricked them. The potion had actually been a paralysis agent. Tet called him foolish and asked whether no one had ever taught him not to drink something handed over by a stranger. As Alvin struggled to speak, Tet explained that he had drunk the real poison-resistant potion, while the other 3 had been given lime toad paralysis secretion, a liquid identical in color. He said he had simply swapped his potion with theirs, and Alvin had never noticed. Alvin saw Melina lying nearby and spotted an extra empty vial on the ground. He wondered if Sokolo had drunk hers as well. Tet continued speaking in a calm, almost bored tone while Alvin was overwhelmed with guilt for not checking the item name before drinking it. Tet told him that this happened because they didn't take adventuring seriously. He said he would borrow Alvin's hand for a moment, checked his belongings and transferred everything into his own account. At that moment Kokolo suddenly lunged to strike him. Tet dodged instantly, but froze when he realized she wasn't paralyzed. Kokolo explained that she had drunk the potion but she possessed a high-level paralysis-resistant skill. Tet acknowledged that was impressive but then noticed his own HP had dropped dangerously low. Kokolo revealed she was level 80, with strength far higher than his, and asked whether he really wanted to fight her while his HP was that low. Tet sighed and laughed, saying he had no choice, and threw his weapon at her while calling her a cheater. She replied that he was the last person who had any right to say that. Realizing he couldn't win, Tet reluctantly cured both Alvin and Melina. Kokolo then said she intended to physically retrain him and asked for a rope. Alvin handed her one, and together they tied Tet up. Kokolo suggested taking him back to the guild to turn him in. Tet began crying, saying he already had a lump on his head. Melina suggested pushing him toward a pack of mermen instead. Kokolo told her that was too harsh. Melina said she was joking, though she wasn't entirely sure whether Tet's actions had been accidental or a deliberate attempt at monster PK. Tet insisted it really had been an accident, but Kokolo didn't believe him and said they should let the guild decide. Alvin wondered whether it had been an accident or intentional. Melina agreed with Kokolo, saying it was unsafe to drag Tet around and equally dangerous to leave him alone. Kokolo asked Alvin if he agreed, but he asked if they could wait before turning Tet in. They asked what was wrong and Alvin said there was a good chance Tet would escape before they reached the guild, since he likely had a skill that let him slip out of restraints. Tet tried to act cute, insisting Alvin was overthinking. Alvin continued, saying Tet could escape whenever he wanted. He added that he always tried to understand people's motives, something taught by his sword master, and asked why Tet had only stolen items needed to continue an adventure. Tet scoffed and asked if Alvin had any imagination at all. Alvin pointed out that Tet had taken potions, food, and spare equipment, but had deliberately ignored the merman's tear, a rare and extremely valuable gemstone. No real thief would overlook something like that. Kokol wondered whether that meant Tet had not been trying to PK or rob them at all, but had actually been trying to stop them from progressing. Tet became irritated and told them to just go home. Melina felt certain there was still something he wasn't telling them. Then Tet's tone suddenly shifted. He said that because they had saved his life it felt like his duty to stop them, but now if they insisted on challenging the boss and dying, he no longer cared. Hearing this, Kokol asked whether he knew anything about the boss. Tet turned away and muttered that they wouldn't believe him no matter what he said. Alvin crouched down so he was level with Tet, and said he had a serious problem with what Tet had just implied. He added that Tet seemed to be trying to stop them from challenging the boss while they were still unprepared, so he asked him to simply explain the truth. Depending on what Tet told them, they might even agree to turn back for now, exactly as he wanted. Tet finally admitted that the boss had some kind of secret, which was why no one had ever managed to defeat it. He asked if they had a map of the dungeon's lower levels. When they said no, he pointed out that it was strange. Normally parties who attempted raids would at least sell map fragments for extra cash, yet not a single piece of information had ever been released. Melina suggested it could be because the Cave of Setting Sun was newly generated, or simply unpopular. But Tet shook his head and said the truth was far worse. Not a single party had ever returned after attempting that raid. Alvin was stunned. Adventurers skilled enough to reach the 40th floor would be extremely cautious. It didn't make sense for so many to vanish. Tet laughed bitterly and explained that although the lower monsters were poisonous, reaching the boss room itself wasn't difficult as long as one handled the poison properly. The real problem began after entering the boss chamber. He said the first thing any party would do was confirm whether 40 floors really existed and then study the boss's elemental type and attack patterns. But according to him, the door closed automatically as soon as someone stepped inside, and no one had ever been able to leave afterward. Since the dungeon still existed, that meant no one had ever cleared it. Alvin agreed with a grim expression. If no party had ever come back, then the boss must have killed all of them. A door that locked itself meant there was no retreat, only victory or death awaited them inside. Kokol gave Alvin something to think about when she mentioned she had taken on quite a few bosses in the deeper layers before. Alvin added that it wasn't surprising. She was an exceptionally high-level healer, after all. Kokol admitted there were still things even she couldn't decipher, but she explained that it was normal for boss rooms to forbid retreat, since each had its own unique gimmicks. Tet added that these restrictions existed because the dungeon's creators didn't want anyone bringing back information about those mechanisms. Kokol explained that boss rooms usually had special conditions, and that clues about them were always hidden somewhere within the dungeon, whether in the lore or in gimmicks that mirrored the mechanics of the fight. She didn't know why it was always structured that way, but that was simply how dungeons worked. Because of this, she found it impossible to imagine that a dungeon like the Cave of Setting Sun, one with no special features, would have a retreat-blocking gimmick. Melina wondered aloud whether Tet was lying again. Tet reacted with irritation and pointed out that if the dungeon weren't hiding something significant, and if conquering it depended only on the right levels and manpower, someone would have cleared it already. Alvin realized Tet was implying the dungeon held a major hidden secret. Tet insisted there was a secret, one known only to the boss itself. He said it was irrational that not a single hint existed. Kokol agreed, saying dungeons shouldn't be irrational, even if exceptions existed. Melina apologized for interrupting but remarked that Tet seemed unusually knowledgeable about the Cave of Setting Sun. She asked why he had gone there in the first place. Tet went silent. Kokol suggested it wasn't because he was aiming for treasure chests in the lower floors. Melina added that since no one had ever returned with map data from the deeper floors, Tet wouldn't have even known they existed when he first entered the dungeon. To conclude that the boss room didn't allow retreat and was extremely dangerous, he must have witnessed multiple parties entering the chamber himself. Kokol asked whether he had never attempted the boss with those parties, saying the idea felt odd. Melina followed up, questioning what motive Tet had for waiting outside the boss room at all. Tet hesitated, and finally said they already knew the reason. Then he turned toward Alvin and told them to ask him instead. All eyes shifted to Alvin. Alvin said he might have a prediction and asked Tet to correct him if he was wrong. At that moment, Tet's memories resurfaced. He had once lived as an enemy to everyone around him, forced into constant competition for limited resources. Somewhere amid that brutal life, he overheard stories about adventurers who didn't fight over resources but instead challenged dungeons as equals. When he was around 10 years old, he became an adventurer, something he had always dreamed of, but because he grew up believing he was inferior, he thought he didn't need comrades. Deep down, though, he wanted to challenge dungeons together with others as equals. Later, he realized his stats had begun to drop, and he could no longer move freely. One day, while fighting alongside a party, he was badly injured by monsters. He asked his comrades to cast Clear on him to recover from the status effects, only to discover that his entire party had abandoned him. He hid in a small hole and barely managed to survive. From that moment on, he resolved never to form a party again. He believed he had to find his own path, no matter how difficult. He also convinced himself that even the boss drops wouldn't affect him emotionally. He could simply steal the rewards after another party defeated the boss. He admitted that this had been his intention from the very beginning. Melina was stunned to hear all of it. Alvin said that Tet had simply been watching them because he was waiting for a chance to steal their loot afterward. Tet replied that a solo thief had no other way to obtain boss drops. Honestly, stealing them was the only possibility. Kokol began insisting that someone like Tet should be handed over to the guild, but Tet countered that they should have noticed from his lack of preparation that theft wasn't his usual habit. He said the situation was unique, and he had acted that way only because he had no other option, since he too carried a minus skill. Tet then smiled calmly and added that there hadn't been any real chance for him to steal anything anyway since the boss room didn't allow retreat. What he really wanted to know was when they had figured it out. Alvin explained that during their battles, Tet had used a large variety of skills, far too many. That made Alvin suspicious. Tet had displayed techniques Alvin had never seen before. Along with that, Alvin had a preconceived notion tied to the dungeon. Possessing an unusually large number of skills often meant someone was a minus skill bearer. Once he assumed that might be true for Tet, everything started to make sense. Their conversation continued, and Alvin eventually asked whether Tet's former party had failed to conquer the boss room. Tet said he had warned them repeatedly about how dangerous it was, but none of them listened. He muttered that adventurers could be as dense as rocks. He said that even with a temporary party like theirs, the younger members always showed reckless determination, which was why he had at least wanted to warn them. He added that if he ever found comrades willing to accompany him despite everything, that alone would be enough. Even if he never managed to rid himself of his minus skill, having people who chose to stay with him would still hold meaning. As they continued exploring, Kokol apologized to Tet for hitting him from behind. Tet told her not to worry, saying he had pushed himself too far anyway, and she had even restored his HP. Still, she felt guilty about what she had done. When he asked if she meant the injuries, he explained that he could handle those easily. He sometimes even took blows to the chin during fights. He added that without any stat modifications, she possessed an absurd amount of strength. She was startled and asked what he meant by absurd. They then talked about how generous Alvin had been to hand over the merman tier, saying they wouldn't have made any progress without him. Melina asked Alvin if this was supposed to make up for Tet calling them poor earlier. Alvin then asked why they had come back into the cave. Melina replied that they wanted to clear out the minuscales. Alvin asked what they needed to do, and Melina said she wanted to form an official party and aim for achievements. None of them could reach alone. Alvin agreed that forming a proper party was a good idea. He added that if she believed Tet wanted the same thing, then this might be a good opportunity for him too. Tet suddenly asked whether they weren't going to the lower floors. Alvin replied that they were looking for monsters capable of inflicting debuffs. Tet asked if Alvin wanted to see the effects of mummy theft, and said that since he was joining them now, they should think about the fact that he had received such an extraordinary stone. He then promised to guide them to the boss room. Right after saying that, his foot slipped and he fell. Looking around in confusion, he wondered why that particular area was frozen. Kokol and Melina were just as confused, until Alvin noticed something and identified it as a frost chimera, an especially powerful creature that must have been hiding nearby. Kokol still didn't understand the situation, and Melina asked whether they should retreat. Tet froze at the suggestion. He feared he would be used as bait again like before. The thought of being abandoned and dying such a miserable death terrified him. Kokol called his name, asking if he was even listening. He snapped out of his thoughts and she relaxed slightly, looking genuinely worried because he hadn't responded for a moment. They soon realized the chimera was already close. Kokol helped Tet to his feet, and he asked if she wasn't planning to run away. Alvin was already engaging the chimera, and said that if he were left alone he might be forced to waste an escape item, but if they fought together they could handle it. He added that if Tet had no objections they were continuing the battle. Tet was stunned that the three of them weren't abandoning him this time, and he prepared to fight as well. The chimera roared, and Alvin recognized that it was about to unleash its freezing breath toward their rear guard. Kokol wondered if that breath was its strongest attack. Melina said they needed to avoid it. Alvin then asked Tet what he was doing. Tet stood in front of them and Alvin realized he must be planning something. Tet said that since things were getting dangerous he would try to protect them. Kokol granted him freeze resistance and told him to be careful. Tet focused on the chimera and spotting a serpent head rushed forward and slashed it, cutting off its breathing attack. Alvin was stunned, wondering if Tet was even supposed to aim for something like that. Tet then asked Melina to use lightning, and she immediately complied, surprising even him. The attack dealt heavy damage, but the monster was still standing. Alvin realized it was preparing to fly, which would make the fight harder, so he decided he needed to finish it. Before he could act, however, Tet used his agility to rush in and strike the chimera down. Together they finally defeated the monster. Alvin complimented Tet's knife. Kokol noted that Alvin always paid attention to the tiniest details, while Melina pointed out that Tet not only had multiple techniques but could also fight at mid-range. After the battle, Tet stood there trying to catch his breath, and Kokol approached him, asking if he wasn't basically a badass. Tet recalled how, in the past, he had always looked down on the adventurers he traveled with, thinking they were all idiots. Even now, when he finally had comrades truly willing to fight beside him, he wondered why he was risking his life based on such uncertain information. He realized there must have been people with only minor skills in his old parties too, and their comrades still accepted them. Like the adventurers in old tales, they were meant to share both hardships and triumphs as they faced challenges together. He felt envious of that. When Alvin held out his hand, Tet gladly returned the high five, unable to hide his happiness. Alvin then mentioned that the snake tail had been the chimera's weak point, something he hadn't known himself. Tet said it had only seemed like the right target. Alvin was surprised that Tet hadn't known for sure, and had simply guessed. Tet explained that it was his first time fighting a chimera species. Alvin asked if that was how Tet's skill worked, but Tet denied it and said it was something Alvin would usually sense instinctively. Melina found the discussion interesting and asked for a more detailed explanation, thinking she might also learn how to identify Tet's weaknesses. Tet said it was difficult to explain in words, but she might understand if she thought from the perspective of the world's creator. When they looked confused, he explained that if this world functioned like a simulation, then a creator must exist. He added that since there were no invincible monsters and no unstoppable weapons, then in the deepest dungeons they would simply encounter stronger and stronger foes, and once the final boss was defeated, everything would reset or vanish. Alvin commented that this might actually be how things worked, and Tet concluded that the world maintained its own balance. He believed that a monster's weak points wouldn't be placed in spots no one could ever notice, but rather in locations that were reasonable and could be discovered at the right moment. It was a special sense he had developed after countless battles, and he admitted he couldn't get rid of it even if he tried. Alvin commented that it sounded like Tet's wild intuition. Melina said she doubted she could ever see through such weak points and didn't think she would get along with the so-called creator of the world. She added that if she were on a treasure hunt, she would hide the treasure somewhere no one could ever find. Tet replied that this was exactly why he said it was difficult to explain. Alvin then asked Kokol what she thought, but Kokol had already spaced out, staring ahead with a trembling expression as she looked at the skill. When Melina checked on her, Kokol said it seemed to be exactly what they had expected. Whether by coincidence or inevitability, Alvin didn't care about the reason. He was simply thrilled by what had happened. Still overwhelmed, Kokol said that miracles really did exist. Tet asked what they were talking about and whether they wanted to see the effect of mummy theft, since he would have to suffer a debuff for them to witness it. He then suggested they should get moving, but the three of them suddenly turned toward him. Melina said she actually wanted to see how Tet behaved under an ordinary debuff, and Alvin and Kokol clearly had the same idea. Tet felt uneasy, calling it creepy, and wondered if it was really safe to let his guard down around them. Tet was sitting at a high spot in the dungeon, trying to see far into the distance, but he couldn't find a single monster. Kokol said they would never find what they were searching for. Tet suddenly jumped up and asked how everyone liked his knife, adding that it left a trail of light whenever he swung it. Alvin said he found it really cool. Kokol looked curious about the knife, and Tet told her it only looked cool. When Melina didn't understand, Tet and Alvin shouted together that it was the spirit of an adventurer. Alvin added that it was something only they would understand. Tet said the knife also had great offensive capabilities. He admitted he might not have the physical strength required for heavy weapons, but he wasn't going to lose when it came to firepower. Kokol laughed and Melina joked by asking if he had stolen a rare weapon by snatching someone else's drop. Tet responded that it was rude of her to say so, insisting he had found it himself on the 50th floor of the ancient dragon god palace. Alvin was surprised, and Kokol asked what level he was. Tet revealed he had 9 skills and was currently level 55. Melina was startled and said he had been at a higher level than all of them the whole time, apologizing for doubting him. Tet explained he had been so focused on treasure hunting that he had reached that level before he even realized it. Suddenly Alvin heard a noise, and when they checked, he discovered an aqua salamander. He said it would cast agility decrease if provoked, but if its HP dropped too much, it wouldn't cast the debuff. He admitted it was hard for him to hold back, so he asked Tet for help. Tet agreed and said he would hit it with a few throwing knives. After he did, the salamander began casting the debuff. Alvin decided to let it hit him, and once it did, he struck it down, causing a pile of gold coins to drop. Tet asked Alvin to check his stats, but Alvin didn't have a debuff icon. Tet checked his own and didn't have one either, which made him wonder if Alvin had dodged it. Since he himself also had no debuff effect, he was shocked and confused about what was happening. Melina then came to say that Kokol didn't have the jealous god curse anymore, so they were sure something was different. Melina then asked Tet again to join their party. Tet said he was confused because they were already in the same party and asked if she was having memory problems. She denied it, then repeated that she wanted him to stay with them forever. Tet became flustered and said she couldn't just say something like that. Realizing what she had said, Melina grew embarrassed, and Kokol pointed out that Melina often said such things. Melina then told him to ignore it, and said that instead of only guiding them, he should be a full member of their party from now on. Tet wondered what was happening, and how she planned to explain everything to him, his stats, the huge amount of experience he gained, and everything else. Melina said it was fine, and that they would start from the very beginning. She explained that all of them also possessed negative skills. Tet was shocked, and she added that they had each come alone to get the botched drop item. Alvin reminded him that they were only a temporary party formed inside the dungeon. Tet wondered if they were messing with him, and said that if they all had negative skills it would be a serious problem. Melina said it was a good time for Capio to explain her skill. Capio revealed that her negative skill was called the Severed Head of the Usurper. After she explained how it worked, Tet said it was an unusual ability, and he finally understood why they were all focused on kill bonuses, and had reached such high levels. He ended by saying he hated all of them for it. Tet then asked why they had formed a party with Capio in the first place. Melina replied that Capio needed her skill, explaining that her own negative skill was the blessing of the jealous god. She described how it worked, and both Alvin and Tet found it incredibly complicated. Tet finally understood the reason behind his sudden increase in stats. Capio added that it was thanks to Melina that she no longer monopolized all the kill boards. Melina answered that Capio would end up getting hit with all those debuffs because of it. Tet, surprised, asked where all those debuffs were coming from. He then learned that the constant 3% stat reduction came from the Jealous God Curse, a debuff that reduced Capio's stats every time she received it. Her stats had been continuously dropping, and Tet thought the effect was terrible, but Melina said it was normal. Alvin reminded him that since Capio was already level 80, losing a bit of stats was nothing she needed to worry about. Capio agreed, saying that not having to steal kills anymore made the trade-off worthwhile. Alvin realized Tet had explained things too quickly earlier, and decided to let the others clarify everything for him instead. Tet pointed out that Capio currently didn't have any debuff icons. When she denied removing them, he asked why she didn't have any active debuffs, and said the Jealous God Curse should have attached itself to him instead. If it was truly a debuff, then his own curse should have been erased somehow, and even the effect of Hunter becomes the hunted had vanished. Melina told him that her skill had removed all of it, explaining that Hunter becomes the hunted was only an additional effect. Tet was shocked to hear this. Melina then asked Alvin to explain his skill as well. Alvin said his negative skill only decreased the drop rate. Tet couldn't believe it, and said it sounded shabby and weak. Alvin felt bad, so Tet quickly apologized, saying he meant that the drop rate had decreased so much that the debuff had practically disappeared. They continued talking about their past experiences, and Kokol reminded them not to forget about her own skill that activated at the moment of a kill. Tet then understood that Kokol's severed head skill cancelled out Alvin's drop rate reduction. Alvin explained that he and Kokol had been the first to meet and form the temporary party. With that, everything finally made sense about how all four of them had met and supported one another despite their negative skills. Tet said it was more than just cancelling effects, since they still gained a 10% increase in all stats, and a neutralization of minor buffs. Alvin recalled everything he had figured out earlier. After a moment, Kokol started talking about synergy, how certain skills complemented each other and enhanced all effects when combined. She said their four skills blended together unusually well. Melina admitted she had never imagined that negative skills could have such synergy. She asked if their explanation was clear enough. She also mentioned that there weren't many parties with such balance, good average levels, solid team composition, and mastery over multiple unique skills, but she added that they didn't have to worry about how many debuffs they could cancel, since she alone could handle all of them. Tet realized that he would have to participate in the boss fight if he wanted to fully join their party. Alvin stepped forward and agreed, saying he didn't blame Tet for hesitating since it was a difficult decision. There was no guarantee they would obtain the skill erasure effect, even though their party was the closest one to defeating the boss. He then encouraged everyone by saying they should go for it, and that he wanted to face the boss together with Tet. Tet understood, but said that if they abandoned him during the fight, he would return as an undead monster just to curse them. Alvin replied that without Tet, he himself wouldn't be able to avoid receiving the curse debuff. As they spoke, both of them grew so excited that Alvin ended up lifting Tet. Melina joked that Alvin had finally won Tet over. Kokol felt conflicted, saying Alvin seemed to be getting oddly better at this. Alvin told them not to make it weird, insisting it was simply the result of his sincerity. Then he suggested they stop fooling around and start collecting the drops. Tet agreed, saying they needed to hurry before everything disappeared. While gathering the loot, Tet found a scroll. Kokol said she thought it might be the flavor text. Melina wondered whether the monster had been carrying the scroll. Alvin said it was extremely rare, and wondered if the aqua salamander had been programmed to simply swallow items like that. Melina was shocked to hear the possibility. Tet then started reading the hints written on the scroll. Kokol guessed that the hint might be related to monsters that disappear. Melina added that she felt the colors mentioned in the text didn't represent the monster groups very well. Then someone pointed out that the pattern resembled a rainbow. Tet mentioned that the colors of the monsters seemed to follow the order of a rainbow. Melina agreed but admitted she had never noticed it, and that it was a bit too late for such a hint to be useful. Saul suggested that the rainbow pattern, or simply the color theme, might just be part of the dungeon's design. Cockle thought it was supposed to give them a clue about the boss battle, but she realized she was both right and wrong. Tet said that the boss battle they were heading toward was connected to the tense text they had found, or perhaps they had already discovered the clue without realizing it. Alvin guessed they would simply have to wait for a moment of inspiration. He then suggested that they keep moving to search for the next piece of text. They continued onward and found a passage. Tet mentioned that beyond it was the floor with the boy, and added that all the monsters beyond that point carried poison. Alvin said the potion was working, but warned them not to be careless. Tet assured them the potions were high quality and would last a long time. As they descended deeper, Alvin told Tet that his decreasing drop rate had been nothing but a burden. Tet denied this and said he was amazed that Alvin had remained an adventurer despite such a skill, and that he never imagined he would see the day when that skill would actually be useful. Alvin said he was truly glad Tet had become their friend, and Tet smiled, saying it was because he was useful even without relying on his skills. When they reached the stairs, Tet said they should leave the boss to him, since it must be difficult for Alvin to be the only vanguard and he might not be able to form a defensive wall despite his high firepower. Alvin thanked him, and when he noticed Kokolai and Melina chatting behind them, he moved closer to Tet and said he was relieved to finally have another guy around. Suddenly Tet revealed that he was actually a girl, leaving Alvin shocked. Alvin was shocked and asked why Tet had such a masculine name, a rough way of speaking, and those preferences. Tet rushed forward, called him a dummy, and said she didn't care. She then told Kokolai and Melina that Alvin could act as the vanguard on his own while she threw knives from the back. Kokolai reminded Alvin that he knew such misjudgments could be dangerous. Melina asked how he could be so rude. Alvin bowed and apologized for everything Kokolai had pointed out. Kokolai told Tet that Alvin was truly clueless about such matters. Melina added that Tet could stay with her instead. A little later, as they continued forward, they encountered a giant hen and defeated it. Alvin said they now had a flashy last-minute addition and wondered what they should do next. Kokolai suggested they take it down. Tet expected a reward for her hard work, and after that they were all ready to move on. As they proceeded to the 40th floor, they found themselves facing a terrifying monster, and Alvin prepared to counter the orbs it launched. He moved in to strike, thinking that Kokolai's enhancement element was working powerfully, so all he needed to do was focus on landing his blows. He delivered several slashes, and when Melina noticed the monster's behavior, she warned him that its next ranged attack would probably be different. Alvin replied that the monster had already lost 10% of its HP so quickly, and the ranged attack should be a set of 3 consecutive blasts. He retreated, thinking Melina would start chanting as soon as she saw how long the 3 blasts lasted. Tet called out to Alvin, saying it looked like Melina had something in mind. Alvin said she was probably planning to finish the monster with the next attack and that it would require a lot of firepower. Tet asked what they should do next. Alvin thought they wouldn't know if the ranged attack pattern had changed until the monster released the first blade, so he told Tet to keep an eye on Melina while he intercepted the attack. Tet agreed. Alvin then considered that the rear position was out of the monster's attack range, and the vanguard's role was to draw aggro, buy time, and deal damage. He felt they didn't even need to speak much to understand each other, and the party was truly easy to fight alongside. As the monster prepared to attack, Kokol applied a large darkness resistance buff just in time. Alvin landed the first parry slash, then delivered 2 more, thinking that fully parrying a monster at the lowest floor was still difficult. After the exchange, he told the others to heal, and they managed it just in time. Finally, Tet rushed in and slashed the monster, saying it would be left completely stiff after using such a big move and that she still had more where that came from. As Tet destroyed the monster's opening, she noticed that her dagger technique seemed to boost her attack power with every strike. After that, Melina prepared herself, thanked everyone for their patience, and unleashed her ranged attack to finish off the monster. Watching this, Alvin was reminded of his former party, when they had once fought a monster deep inside a dungeon. He had told Charon to stay back because he was standing within the monster's attack range. Alvin had realized Charon still intended to cast his spell even at the risk of being hit. Before the monster could inflict serious damage, Charon managed to defeat it. A rare item dropped, and while everyone was checking it and healing their wounds, Alvin told Charon he shouldn't have stood so close in that situation. Charon, furious, shouted that he couldn't cast properly if he wasn't standing still, and that he risked messing everything up otherwise. He added that only a great swordsman would know such things. Alvin replied that he only meant it wasn't safe to stand somewhere he could be hit. Charon argued that Alvin could have landed the finishing blow during the time he was chanting, and if Alvin were calling it dangerous, then he should have acted sooner. Alvin admitted that was true, but Charon suddenly held up the rare item, saying that he took the risk, he killed the monster, and therefore Alvin should understand what that meant, especially considering Alvin's drop rate decreasing skill. Alvin fell silent, walked a short distance away, and sat down, thinking that once everyone calmed down, he would hand over the kill safely and suggest farming on shallower floors. He guessed that as the party leader, Charon couldn't help worrying about the team's income and expenses while leveling, and Alvin wondered if it was time for him to leave. He hadn't considered how he could level up efficiently while being restricted, and even though it had been rewarding in its own way, he now felt the freedom of being able to swing his sword with full strength without holding back. To him, there was nothing more enjoyable in the world than that. He stopped reminiscing and went to praise Melina for her work. She admitted she hadn't expected a blast of light magic that powerful, since she didn't use it very often. She added that if she didn't cast it in battle from time to time, she would end up forgetting it entirely. She thanked Alvin for buying her enough time to finish the incantation. Alvin and Tet gave each other a high five to show their appreciation. Then Alvin went to Kokol, telling her that her healing and buffs were the definition of perfection, and he high-fived her as well. She blushed, and the others said they always felt completely safe whenever Kokol handled HP management. She mentioned that she often predicted when Alvin would need healing and began her incantations ahead of time. Alvin thanked her for all the buffs she had cast. He felt it was different for him since he only focused on drawing aggro and dealing damage, whereas she was incredibly reliable. Combat roles were easy to understand, so the attackers tended to get the spotlight, but he believed that healers like her were the most essential members of any party. Kokol became flustered and quickly tried to shift the attention to Melina, saying Melina was far more amazing than she was. Melina, shocked, asked her not to drag her into it as well. Kokol insisted that Melina had never fumbled an incantation and had avoided every hit. Melina replied that it was only because she stayed close during battles, and she had simply noticed the change in the ranged attacks even though it was their first time seeing them. She insisted she was merely being observant. Melina then said that Tet was far better, since she caused the most staggers, and even though Melina should have been the one dealing more damage, it was Tet who seemed to instinctively sense the timing, almost like that creator's intuition she had mentioned. Tet explained that she had fought biased demons before, and had given them special lessons in proper counter timing. Melina asked her to wait, saying that no matter how she looked at it, it was still strange that she had managed to counter it so consciously. Alvin patted Tet's head in agreement, saying it wasn't a matter of skill alone. Tet pulled away, wondering why even Alvin was saying such things when he was clearly more capable than she was. Alvin was surprised, unsure what he had done to make her think that, but Tet didn't respond to his question. If you enjoyed this recap and want to dive into more worlds, hidden power, and insane plot twists, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And if there's a story you want next, make sure to leave it in the comments.